We're in business to save the planet, and we use making clothes to do that. The cure for depression is action. Every one of us has to step up and do what you can according to what your resources are.
That was the voice of Patagonia's Yvonne Chenard, and this is Type 2, a podcast from Looking Sideways in association with Patagonia that explores the intersection between outdoors, action sports, and activism. Now, in each show, I'll be meeting people who are using their passion and involvement with the cultures we all love to create change. We're going to be discussing the issues they're involved in, the change they're seeking to make, the difficulties involved, and the rewards that follow. So my guest this week on the second episode of Type 2 is longboarder Belinda Bagg. Now, Bindi's a surfer from Newcastle in Australia, who's renowned as one of surfing's foremost longboarding stylists, I'd say. In the water, her milestones are numerous. She initially made a name on the competitive circuit, but like I say, is really renowned for the elegance of her approach to wave riding. She's also got the distinction of being the first female surfer featured on the cover of Surfer's Journal, which should give you some idea of the renown in which Belinda is held. Today, she's an ambassador for Patagonia and works across numerous projects with the brand. Like a lot of surfers, Belinda's relationship to the ocean is much more than the simple act of wave riding. As she said in a recent interview, it encompasses care for the environment, respect for the power of nature. It's the ultimate playground. It's a place to be challenged and a place to relax. It's a viewpoint that helps to explain her passionate, forthright involvement in the fight for the Bight, the grassroots campaign that aims to stop Norwegian oil giants Equinor from drilling for oil in the Great Australian Bight. Now, as a resident of Victoria these days, it's an issue that is particularly close to home for Bindi, who's been tirelessly using her platform to draw attention to the issue and spearhead the fight for what has rapidly become a symbolic frontline issue for surfers around the world. As you've probably gathered from social media, it's an important one, this, because it sums up the battles that lie ahead. The resources are finite, and obviously a company like Equinor deciding to, explore one of the world's great wildernesses in an attempt to extend the life of fossil fuels is a pretty considerable battleground, I would say, which is why this campaign, I think, is so close to home for a lot of people and why Bindi's so passionate about it. We met up in Ventura in April 2019. We sat down, we discussed the life in surfing, we discussed the fight for the Bight, and the ways in which activism has gradually evolved to become more of an important element in her life. It was a really thoughtful, reflective conversation with one of my favourite surfers. Hope you enjoy it. Here's me and Belinda Bagg. Enjoy. So I'm with Belinda. How are you?
I'm good. How are you, Matt?
I'm good. Yeah, nice to see you. So we're in Ventura. My first time in Ventura. Got a classic view of the point. And you've been here all week, right?
Yeah, I've been in California for the last 5 days, working with Patagonia and a huge team of their ambassadors on a Tool for Activists summit.
Yeah, is that the first time Patagonia have held one of these events?
Yeah, so they've often done the events that are more aimed at people who are working on grassroots environmental causes, but none specifically aimed at their ambassadors or athletes. So it was really great to get everyone together and see just how much work everybody's been putting in towards protecting the places that they all play and love, and also to know that we have a really strong community within the ambassador network, so much so that I almost feel like a lot of them are like a family, to be able to learn from and kind of like skill share and to be able to help each other out when it's really important.
Is that something that you do quite often then? Everybody get together and kind of share resources and ideas in this way?
I think, this was the first time we've done it internationally.
Yeah.
But quite often within our regions, I think we will be sharing support and resources within each other, which has happened recently within Australia.
Yeah. Well, of course. Very nicely brings us to the kind of campaign I guess you've been really involved with recently, which is the Fight for the Bight, which I guess most people listening to this will have seen on social, really, because it's had a huge presence on social, hasn't it, this campaign? So could you explain what that is, like what the issue is.
What is the fight for the Bight?
Yeah, just for people that might have seen it and not really delved any further.
Yeah, so quite a few years ago, they have opened up the oil exploration rights for a zone down in the Great Australian Bight. And previously there's been a few companies look at it. BP was one who looked at it and pulled out. Chevron was another one, looked at it and pulled out. And now there's a Norwegian company called Equinor who currently have just put in their environmental plan to drill for oil in the Great Australian Bight. Now, for anyone who doesn't know where the Great Australian Bight is, it's basically the southern coastline of Australia. It's open to a weather system called the Roaring Forties, which I think the name in itself is sort of pretty explanatory.
Yeah, it gets the full power of the Southern Ocean, basically.
Exactly.
Because the Roaring Forties effectively go round the bottom of the globe, don't they, and hit that part of Australia, effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's one of the wildest places on the planet.
It really is. It's truly wild. It's also a place where there's a lot of protected marine species. There's a breeding ground for southern right whales. There's a lot of sea life down there, a lot of birds.
Yeah.
And it's just a really wild part of the coast as well.
Yeah. So a couple of things to say on that. So you said that the government granted the rights to this. It was a Labour government, wasn't it? I think it was quite a while ago, wasn't it? It was like 2011 or something.
It was quite a while ago, yeah.
And do they effectively just grant those licenses for people to explore the possibility of drilling in areas like that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the exact wording and terminology here,
Sure.
so I could be getting some of that wrong. But yeah, so they've basically granted them the rights to put in their environmental plan.
Yeah, to explore the possibility. Yeah.
The possibility of drilling for oil in the Great Australian Bight.
And it should be said as well that it's very, very deep water drilling, right? So
yeah,
it's ludicrously ambitious engineering project, let's say.
Completely. So it's around 2 kilometers deep.
Yeah.
The actual well itself is 340 kilometers out into the ocean. It's a floating platform, and they go 2 kilometers down to the seafloor and then have to go about, I think it's just under 3 kilometers through the Earth's crust to access the oil. So, I mean, those depths in itself are just absolutely insane.
Yeah.
And when you combine that with the weather patterns that come through there and the inability to, in those storm situations, get out to stop that oil if there is a case of a spill is just too much to risk.
Yeah, because I guess the closest comparison is the one in the Gulf of Mexico, right? Because that was the Deepwater Horizon.
Deepwater Horizon, yeah.
And that was not as remote or ambitious an engineering project either, was it?
No, it wasn't. And the depths also aren't quite as much when I think maybe the drilling through the crust was longer. Was further. Drilling through the crust was further, but the depth of the ocean floor wasn't as much, or vice versa. It was one of the two.
Yeah.
But this one, when you add it up in total numbers, is just over.
Yeah. And the other thing to say is that it's never been done before, has it? By any oil company. No one's actually attempted to a project of this remoteness or scale. And the other thing to say is it is exploratory, so they don't even actually know what they're going to find, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And on the wider context, I guess what you're seeing is oil companies basically trying to find the last resources that they can exploit, right? And having to go into ever wilder and more remote and complicated situations to get there. Exactly.
And I mean, this particular, their own spill modelling shows that if there is a spill, there's potential for that spill to go from, Western Australia, Margaret River area, all across the southern coastline of Australia, up through Victoria, up to part of New South Wales, up to Port Macquarie, Tasmania.
Which is pretty much Sydney, right?
Past Sydney.
Yeah,
way past Sydney.
So it's all the way, and which is the graphic that's been doing the rounds on social.
Yes.
Which is actually their own modelling, right?
Yeah, that is taken off. That graphic was taken off of their own modelling in their environmental plan.
Yeah.
So that was a worst case.
Well, yeah.
But it's a pretty bad case.
Yeah. So, are there? I mean, I'm guessing that when you setting up a project like this, you need to demonstrate if there was a calamity and there was like an oil spill, like how quickly you could sort it out, right?
Right.
So given the remoteness, like what's the scenario there?
Not fantastic because of the weather patterns and the huge seas, which would stop some of their boats from even being able to access the area in bad conditions. As well as most of that coastline is like sea cliffs as well. And so the accessibility to that is like very low. Yeah.
Well, the argument presumably being made in favour of it is jobs and the resource issue, right? But then on the flip side, and this is where we're going to get to the work that you're involved with, what's being threatened are the existing communities and industries that are there, right? So could you give us an idea of some of those communities and industries that stand to be threatened by this?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot of fisheries industry, tourism, and as well as a lot of local communities. Like even the community that I live in near Torquay in Victoria is built around tourism, surf tourism, and so all of that risk is at risk and it's threatened. So, it kind of spans beyond that. Like we have handed out petitions to the local businesses, and we've had everything from like the fish and chip shop and the coffee shop and the hotel owner, the caravan park operator, like all signing this, saying like it's not in our best interest, basically.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge campaign, there's a huge grassroots campaign. There's NGOs involved, there's concerted action on a lot of different levels, right? Which you're involved with. So could you give us an idea of what those different levels of action against this currently look like? Yeah,
so the main alliance that's been working on this is Great Australian Bight Alliance, who Patagonia has also been supporting and is a part of. They have been passing out educational material on this for quite some time, as well as petitioning and trying to also get local councils to sign off on officially opposing drilling in the Great Australian Bight because of the risks that it would have and the threats that it places on that area. So in Torquay, a couple of months ago, we petitioned our local council, so the Surf Coast Shire Council, to officially oppose drilling in the Great Australian Bight. We had petitions up all over town. It wasn't an online thing, so people actually had to show up in person to sign and put their address on. We then took it to the council, who placed it at a meeting, and then we had half the town turn up because it was such an important issue for us all. And then the council board members put it to a vote, and they almost unanimously, I think there was one or two of the board members that still weren't sitting with us, but opposed it. And then they have officially opposed it to our federal government, which with one council just doing it doesn't really make a difference.
Yeah, I guess the point it's
collectively linking them all together.
These community efforts,
exactly,
right?
Yeah, so there's been a few councils along the coastline now. I think maybe the tally's just under 10 or so councils that are officially opposing it, but there's other ones that are still being petitioned and worked on. So that was, I guess, that was sort of my first step to being part of the campaign, was really getting behind it on a local level and making people aware that this, even though it is in this remote part of Australia that, most of us probably will never visit or see like firsthand, like we're not going to see the oil rig out in the ocean, but we're directly threatened by it. And, it's going to hit us all, like our livelihood, the economy and things like that.
Well, it's also like a real outlier for the current state of how we deal with the environment in the future, isn't it? Because as we said earlier, if this happens, it's such a new flag in the ground for the oil industry, isn't it? Because it'll basically open up that same approach to other remote areas of the world. I mean, that's clearly, if that industry in the face of the environmental movement is going to continue to grow, that must be the only option for them to try and find these, inaccessible areas. So that's why this fight is so important, isn't it? Because the more that people and communities can fight against that, then the more that cuts off that avenue for them for growth, which is, let's be honest, I mean, in the wider context of this whole debate and environmental conversation, their model is numbered, really, eventually. Like,
right.
it can't carry on.
No, it's not an infinite thing,
No.
eventually.
So, eventually we will have to change our approach to energy.
Yes.
I mean, that's just a given.
Right.
So this is almost like a last throw of the dice for them, isn't it, really?
I think so. And I think as well, on top of that, that's really impactful in Australia is that the oil's not even going to us.
Well,
it's getting sent to Norway.
That's the other thing, isn't it? You've got this whole other layer to it, which is the fact it's a Norwegian company.
Yes.
Exploiting Australian resources.
Yes.
For profit, basically.
Yeah. And I know that there's a few kickbacks that the Australian government will receive from that, but the number of jobs that we get out of it is very low, and the threats are just way too high.
Yeah. So what's the process now? Because I know that there was a deadline, wasn't there, for people to... Yeah,
so Equinor had put in their environmental plan, which was open for public comment for 30 days, and ended up having around 31,000 comments on that, which they're now trying to disregard.
Yeah, well, their statement was heavy-handed in the extreme, wasn't it?
It was very heavy-handed.
Very patronising, really.
Yeah, it was quite offensive in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But
what was the gist of that then? How would you basically kind of belittling the movement?
Yeah, I mean, they were basically saying that people that were opposing it were using fear tactics to get the community on board, and that the evidence that we were presenting wasn't factual, which was totally not true because it came from their environmental plan themselves.
Yeah.
So that, and then they were also saying that, a lot of the people's comments weren't answering questions or commenting on parts of the actual comment. It was more throwing out there our concerns.
Yeah, well, it was, it was almost like quite sniffy. It was almost saying like, you've been so emotional about this.
Right. But it's an emotional situation.
Yeah.
Because it's threatening the livelihood and the existence of all our communities. So it is personal for us.
Yeah.
This fight is personal for us. And I think that that's the reason why it's had such a huge response within the Australian surfing communities.
Well, I was about to ask as well, has it had a similar response in the wider community? Because on your Instagram, I saw there's an article that you linked to. I mean, I'm not going to remember his name, but quite a big figure went to Norway, right, and protested directly. So basically, at higher levels, this conversation is starting to people are paying attention. Exactly.
And even to have it in our mainstream media was a huge win, because before all the paddle outs, we were pushing to try and get little media coverage to build awareness. And so it's definitely ramped up in the eyes of the mainstream media and being recognized by a lot of different walks of life now. And I think to have somebody like Twiggy step up and say this risk is not worth it is huge. It's probably one of the biggest wins for the campaign so far. Yeah.
There's also a really strong Indigenous aspect to this whole campaign, isn't there? So do you know what the time frame is for this?
I'm not sure when the actual decision will be made, but they are trying to start drilling next summer.
Okay. Wow, so it's soon.
So it'll be soon.
Right.
Yeah. It's ramping up. And I think that's why there's such an urgency on it right now. All the paddle outs that have been happening, which has been up and down the Australian coastline, and we've had thousands and thousands of people turn out, is kind of just a real outward response to the protest.
Yeah.
We can't get down to South Australia to protest this directly. And so everybody in their communities are turning up in the thousands to protest and sort of show the urgency of the matter at hand.
Yeah. So people can do that. I mean, is there anything direct that people can do to help this fight?
I mean, if you live in Australia, you can petition and keep pressuring your local council to officially oppose drilling in the Great Australian Bight. You can also put pressure on your policymakers.
Yeah, because that's something you've been involved with as well, right?
Yeah, so
making people accountable for their policies.
For their actions and their policies, exactly. Right now, I have a letter going around my local area that I'm going to send out to all our political candidates.
Right.
It just basically says, we want better policies from you, and we're demanding that as voters, and this is how we're going to be voting next election. And to now, like, these same policymakers haven't taken a side on this. They're not taking a stand. So
that pressure
to put the pressure on.
I mean, I guess all these campaigns are about that incremental pressure, aren't they? Like, basically at every level, whether it's media, politicians, local communities,
exactly,
just making sure that people are aware that this is a real passionate issue that people care about.
And I think it kind of goes the same for like people who may live in Europe or in Norway as well, like, and so to be able to pressure, like, the company direct from the side, from the Norwegian side, from the people's side, is as equally important.
So you work for Patagonia as well as a surfer for Patagonia. So have you been involved in that campaign? Because Nevertown is a film that Patagonia made that kind of deals with this issue as well.
So I was involved in Nevertown. We basically just wanted to come up with a film that would prompt people to get together and fight for their own local issues. So the whole idea of it was to make this great surfing film that brushed upon environmental issues, but to play it in all these local communities around Australia and of course around the globe, but and to get everybody together to fight for your own coastline or your own issues that are happening at the time.
I really like the way it was framed. I really like the way that it was essentially about the community's plural relationship with the environment, rather than making it about the single issue, rather than, it was more about, well, let's look at these relationships that people have with the local environments and what they give those communities, and look at it in that, which is obviously the whole point of this. That relationship is what's being threatened, right?
Exactly. And I mean that's, as surfers, that's one thing, is that like we rely on the natural environment for the sport that we love, for our passions, and in certain circumstances, like for our income as well. And for me, like, the ocean is part of my family heritage, and so
it's personal.
It's very, very, very personal. And like, to be able to sort of like use Nevertown as a tool to gather your community of people and present them with issues that may be happening locally was an amazing tool to be able to like get everyone together and really like rally the community about things that are important to them. So I remember when we were doing the first set of tours of the film around Australia, I did one in Newcastle, which is where I grew up. I don't live there now, but I grew up there. And there's just recently been seismic testing going on.
Right.
So it was great. I'd been working with the Stop Seismic Testing Newcastle group already on the issue, but they were kind of lacking community support, mostly just because people didn't know about it. And it was kind of hard to get the message out there. And so we were able to use the film as a tool to like gather community and get together and really discuss the issue for one of the first times.
Right. Well, there's a really nice line, I think, that Rasta says in it, which is that, you can only look at something like this for so long before you need to start participating, and you need to start becoming an activist yourself.
Exactly.
Really, which is obviously the kind of idea and the impetus behind the whole project, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it was really successful in a lot of ways, and I think the film almost set a tone for like what's happening now with Fight for the Bight. So it's sort of been like an integral part of like, rallying that community and having them ready and willing to stand up and be the change that's needed to protect our planet.
So is your own interest in this and your own involvement in campaigns such as this presumably is very linked to your identity as a surfer as well, and your relationship to the ocean? Yeah,
I think, to give you a bit of a backstory, like I've surfed or been on the beach my entire life, and when I first started surfing, I found there was a lot of days that were too big for me to actually get out there and surf, and so I'd spend that time in the sand watching my dad surf and just started picking up rubbish off the beach, picking up plastic and bottles and whatever had washed up, like bits of rope. And it was a really rewarding thing for me to feel like I was able to give back to the place that was giving me so much. Like at the time I was like a young teenager, adolescent, like really confused in life, and the ocean and surfing was like the one place that I felt like I connected and like fit in with the world and didn't have to, you know, get anxiety about not being cool in front of my friends and things like that. And so, yeah, to be able to like do that really simple act of like picking up trash was kind of like the first, I guess, part of like activism, you could say, that I kind of went into. And since then, like, I think it's just grown to see like the coastline change, the issues become worse environmentally, but still being able to like do something to help ultimately is the thing. And to be able to like stand up as an individual and raise awareness and say, I'm not gonna stand for this, you know. And then in a lot of cases I feel like being able to reach out to my community and in some forms like use my surfing to gather other people and get them enthusiastic about the issue and stand up with me is like a really important thing for me right now. Like, I feel like over the years, any kind of surfing profile that I've gotten, like, I understand it now and like it has a purpose, and like if I can use that as a tool to create awareness or, you know, prompt people to stand up, then that's the most important thing.
And that's developed then as your relationship with surfing has evolved, basically. Yeah,
I think so. Like, you know, you go through years of surfing where I'm like, oh, I want to win that contest, or like, oh, maybe like I can use my career to get a trip to Indonesia to go surfing. And now I kind of realize that like none of that was important, and this is sort of like what I'm most passionate about right now is like, wow, like now I understand why I have this community, like, you know, in some form.
So community is a word that's come up a lot. So
yeah.
Do you feel like campaigns that are successful, that's what's at the heart of them, like working with different communities and kind of raising awareness on that level?
Yeah, I think they start at a community level. I mean, for me, like when I have a son who's 7 years old, and I've always been like, you know, as I said, like quite aware of environmental issues and caring and passionate, but it hasn't been until I've had my son that I really realized that like what legacy am I leaving for him, you know, for his generation, because ultimately we're all just custodians of this earth, and you know, we're passing it on to our children, and I want to ensure that he has a safe future. And you know, I feel for the first time as well that like through my son is the first time I've ever felt part of a community.
That's really interesting.
Going to school, and you know, he has friends, and I know everyone in our street, you know, and it's something that's like, yeah, really given me like a place and a community of people, and I see the power in that. Yeah,
and that's because I guess like you say, when you're younger and teens, 20s, start getting into these sports and lifestyles, it's kind of the furthest thing from your mind, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, when I was in my teens, all I wanted to do was get out of my hometown and like travel the world.
You're just thinking looking inwardly, aren't you? You know, what's going to satisfy me? Like,
exactly.
What's going to, you know, what can I do that's going to stoke that internal fire, which is fine. But I do think as you get older or maybe more experienced, you do start to look a little bit more broadly, don't you?
Definitely.
For a bit of meaning and a bit of like, well, what can you give back?
Yes.
In the way that you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of these issues, like these big issues that we're talking about, like as well, like I feel like the fight against, I don't know, speaking about the fight for the Bight example, like for me to like have an impact on what the Australian federal government decides to do is probably not very warranted, you know. But if I can rally my local community, that will have a big impact.
Yeah, and a tangible impact as well.
Exactly.
So people listen to this that may be inspired or thinking that they want to get involved in some way in, you know, on any level. Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for people that where to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think to tackle things at a community level are really important. One other piece of advice that I was given a really long time ago, which has stuck by me, is to utilize the skills and tools that you have at hand. So, you know, for me, it was my surfing. Like, great, I can finally put this to purposeful good use, you know. some people may not surf. It may be that they're an artist or they're a lawyer, or like they have this very special personal skill set. And to reach out to a local environmental group that's working on an issue that you're passionate about, and to offer those skills.
So find your platform almost.
Exactly, yeah. Find your platform, work with somebody who's already informed on the issues that are happening, so you make sure that what you're doing is like with purpose. Then I would say that is to just offer the skills that you have.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to note as well that everybody's voice can be used to be a part of this change, you know, to create this change. And so it's important for us all to stand up and come together collectively to work on changing the system.
Yeah. And this is a theme I've talked about on this podcast before. It's quite easy to kind of level charges of hypocrisy at people like us who kind of have a lifestyle where we travel a lot for seemingly like quite, at times, something like surfing, you know, it's still can be seen as quite self-centered. Like, right. So, you know, it's an obvious charge to level at somebody who's sticking their head above the parapet and deciding that they're going to try and make a positive change. So how do you deal with those kind of criticisms?
I think I admit it. I am a hypocrite in a lot of ways. You know, I am a super nerd and I measure my carbon footprint frequently. And I am a huge believer in the fact that every individual can make a difference, and that how I live and act on a daily basis is maybe not as important, but holds a very high importance to the state of this planet and the environment. And I like to live and lead by example. In saying that, I have a terrible travel footprint. I've been around the world quite a few times. But in order to counteract that, I have completely switched my diet. I don't use plastics. I make sure I source all my own energy within my household from renewable resources, and try and cut down on my emissions wherever I can, basically. Like, I live an examined life, but I will definitely be the one to point out that, like, I still have shortcomings, you know, and I think a lot of my shortcomings are based upon the fact that there needs to be system change. More so than a change that I can implement as an individual. So, like, to, you know, for example, like, our cars are all still powered by petrol. There's alternatives out there now, but they're not implemented by the system. And so to be able to come together, like, collectively as a group of people and demand that change, I think is really powerful.
And what are the rewards for you for living this life that you've just outlined and being part of these community battles, if you like, or maybe the wrong word, but you understand what I mean? Like, what do you get out of it personally?
You know, to be quite honest, I'm terrified of the future for my son. I'm so scared of what the world is going to bring for him. And you read all these scientific reports, and we don't have long. And so the reward is feeling like I'm able to do something, you know. And I look at my role as a parent as being like holding in the highest regard the safety and the future of my child. And the biggest and most important thing that we can fight right now is climate change, which is a huge issue and has multiple layers. And so if I can do all I can on that's within my means to still function and, like, be a mother that's there for him, as well as being able to, like, watch out for his future, that's the reward.
That's a great point to leave it.
Thanks.
Cheers, Belinda.
Thank you.
So there you go. That was me and Bindi for the second episode of Type 2, my new show in association with Patagonia. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider letting me know by dropping me a line at podcast@wearelookingsideways.com or leaving me a message over at my Instagram channel @WeLookSideways. I'll be releasing new episodes of Type 2 every month or so. They're going to appear in my usual Looking Sideways channel, which you can subscribe to via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your usual podcast purveyor. If it's your first time checking out what I do, Make sure you get stuck into the back catalogue. I've got over 90 episodes of interviews with some of the biggest names in action sports and other related endeavours over at my website, www.wearelookingsideways.com. I reckon there'll be a few that you'll enjoy in there. So go and have a look. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. Nice one.